Errol Spence shuts down the Keith Thurman fight. He said, nope, he's still not fighting Keith Thurman. And I got a whole lot to say about that. We're going to chop it up about that in this video. But before we do that, make sure you hit my like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subbed to the channel. Now, yesterday, I came out with a video and I said, Errol Spence, he need to call out Keith Thurman. Yeah, he need to come out of silence and call out Keith Thurman because that's the best possible fight for Errol Spence right now, coming off of all these injuries. And we know that Keith Thurman just had to pull out of the Tim Tszyu fight because he has a bicep injury. Now, if he tore his bicep, it takes 4 to 6 weeks to heal and go through rehab. So that means that Keith Thurman, he'll be ready in the summertime around July, August at the latest. So I said, why not make Errol Spence and Keith Thurman? They already have a history. It's a fight that should have happened about probably 7, 8 years ago. We never got to see it. Then we thought we was going to get the fight in 2022, but Errol Spence was hard-headed and he wouldn't fight Keith Thurman, and he went off a 16-month layoff straight into a Terrence Crawford fight. But now it's the best time to have it since Keith Thurman just had to pull out of his fight with another injury. And so I said, looking at the landscape at 154, Errol Spence, we know he's not going to fight at 147 no more, right? So you go to 154, it's a lot of names at 154, a lot of dangerous fighters. And Errol Spence and Keith Thurman, it will be the best fight because they will be both on an even playing field. Both of them has had long layoff after long layoff. They both injured all the time. So get in the ring and fight each other. That way, you both can fight another fighter that's a big name. You're going to get a lot of money fighting each other. And like I said, you have history. It's a storyline there. But Errol Spence, he comes out immediately and he says, it ain't happening. No, I'm not fighting Keith Thurman. And I have a problem with that, right? Because you said the same thing to PBC when they was trying to get you to fight Keith Thurman before you fought Terrence Crawford. You was hard-headed, and what happened? You went in the Terrence Crawford fight, and we all know what happened. Now, would you have been a lot more sharper? Would you have been able to get through a training camp without being injured if you had took the Keith Thurman fight? I believe so, and I believe that you would have beat Keith Thurman. But now, y'all are really on the even playing field because, like I said, a lot of these fans that don't know shit about boxing, y'all don't understand that the beatdown that Errol Spence took, that takes a toll on you, not only physically, but mentally. We don't know if he's ever going to be the same fighter again, especially mentally after you take a whooping like he did against Terrence Crawford. And I'm going to let it be known now before y'all get to crying in the comments. EJ is my guy. Like, I rock with EJ 1,000%. Definitely one of my favorite fighters. I'm not a huge Keith Thurman fan, but I do respect Keith Thurman's skills and I respect him inside the ring. But EJ continue to stick to this, I'm not fighting Keith Thurman, and we know in the past he said he's never going to fight Keith Thurman because Keith Thurman didn't give him a chance. Well, I have a problem with that because a lot of people ran around for years and said that Keith Thurman ducked Errol Spence. Well, if you look at the timeline, Keith Thurman never ducked Errol Spence, and if Keith Thurman ducked Errol Spence, then we'll have to say that Errol Spence ducked Bud Crawford for years. And I don't believe either one of them. And now I'm going to explain to people why I'm saying what I'm saying. When Errol Spence was calling out Keith Thurman was a champion. Errol Spence had no title at all. Keith Thurman went on to unify his WBA strap that he held with Danny Garcia, who was the WBC champion at the time. Now, when it comes down to business of boxing and making smart moves, what are you going to do? Are you going to go fight Errol Spence that has no title at the time? Or are you going to go unify with somebody that had a much bigger name and somebody that was the WBC champion in Danny Garcia? I mean, it's a no-brainer. So at that point in time, when everybody was saying that Keith Thurman was ducking Errol Spence, how is he ducking when he went to fight Danny Garcia to unify the champion? Now, a few months later is when Errol Spence went over to the UK and fought Kell Brook and got the IBF strap. At that point in time, after Keith Thurman had already unified, Errol Spence was the IBF champion. But you know what the problem was? Keith Thurman suffered an injury, and Keith Thurman went on to be out of the ring for 2 years. So at that point in time, when everybody was on Keith Thurman's helmet, saying he was ducking, he was afraid of Errol Spence, fight Errol Spence, he was injured. He had bone spurs in his elbow, and he had an elbow surgery. He was out for 2 years. So how was he ducking Errol Spence if he was out of the sport with an injury? Now, coming back, Keith Thurman told everybody, look, this is a get back year. I'm not going to fight Errol Spence coming off of this injury, coming off of a 2+ year layoff. It's a get back year for me. I'm going to fight Errol Spence, and it's going to happen next year. Let me get a fight in. Let me get a fight or two in, and me and Errol Spence are going to definitely fight. Now, Keith Thurman, he came back. He fought Josito Lopez, and then after that, he got a Manny Pacquiao fight. So, at the point in time, who has a bigger name, Manny Pacquiao or Errol Spence? It's a no-brainer. Manny Pacquiao has a much bigger name than Errol Spence at that time. I'm just keeping it a buck. So, of course, he's going to fight Manny Pacquiao. Errol Spence was trying to get a Manny Pacquiao fight at that time. Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, all of them was trying to get a Manny Pacquiao fight at that time. And Keith Thurman was the lucky one to get that fight. He made $10+ million in that fight, the biggest payday of his career. So why would he turn down Manny Pacquiao to fight Errol Spence? Is it a duck? Absolutely not. After the Manny Pacquiao fight, Keith Thurman, he suffered another injury. He was injured going into the Manny Pacquiao fight, ended up having hand surgery, and then he was out, almost another 3 years. So with all that being said, when did he duck Errol Spence? Because Errol Spence is set on saying that Keith Thurman ducked him. That's the reason he don't want to fight Keith Thurman, and that's the reason he'll never fight Keith Thurman. I just gave y'all the timeline. And if you want to say that Keith Thurman ducked Errol Spence, you would have to say the same for Errol Spence, because Errol Spence told everybody, I'm not fighting Terrence Crawford until I go get all these straps on my side of the street, and then I'll fight Terrence Crawford. Which I don't have no problem with that. I mean, that's the smart move. Go get the belts and then go take his belt, because now you're going to fight for undisputed. Keith Thurman was doing the same thing. Errol Spence ain't had no belt when he unified with Danny Garcia. And so another problem I have with Errol Spence refusing to fight Keith Thurman after all of these years, right, is because if you want to say Keith Thurman was ducking you, Danny Garcia was flat out ducking you. Sean Porter was flat out ducking you. Sean Porter was ducking Errol Spence so much, Kenny Porter said on an interview that he did with Dante's Boxing Nation, when they was pressing Kenny and Sean to fight Errol Spence, Kenny Porter said, well, why don't we fight and we just have a non-title matchup, right? At this point in time, Errol Spence is the IBF champion, and Sean Porter has I believe the WBC strap at this time, right? And this man says, well, if we fight, we're going to have to fight for a non-title fight. Let's just not even have none of the titles on the line. Let's just fight each other like that to see who'll win. That's how much they was ducking Errol Spence, right? They didn't decide to fight Errol Spence until Errol Spence did over 50,000 against Mikey Garcia in Cowboy Stadium. Then everybody came running. Everybody wanted that bag. And then Danny Garcia, meanwhile, Errol Spence was calling out Danny Garcia when he was the IBF champion, and Danny Garcia didn't even have a strap. He was still trying to fight Danny Garcia. And Danny Garcia continued to duck Errol Spence. At one point in time, in the interview, people was pressing Danny Garcia. I believe it was Fight Hub. They kept pressing Danny Garcia, and Danny Garcia says, look, if the fans want me to fight Errol Spence so bad, won't y'all go fight him? Okay, or pay me $10 million to fight him. Now, at that point in time, asking for $10 million to fight Errol Spence was outrageous. You know what I'm saying? None of them was getting paid that type of money at that point in time, right? They was getting around $3 million, and he wanted $10 million, right? And then he had the nerve enough to say, if y'all want to see him fight so bad, why don't y'all go fight him? I'm not fighting. So Danny Garcia was ducking you. Sean Porter was ducking you. And you still fought Sean Porter and Danny Garcia. Now I understand why he fought Sean Porter, because Sean Porter was the WBC champion, right? Now, a lot of people will say, well, Danny Garcia was his mandatory. No, Danny Garcia was the mandatory because Errol Spence wanted that fight. He stated on several occasions that he wanted Danny Garcia with no strap. So, what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying? They was ducking you also. So, why is there a big problem with Keith Thurman? When Keith Thurman is the best fight for Errol Spence, because they're both on the even playing field. They both been injured for years and years. And they both always have long layoffs. EJ is my guy. I rock with him. I don't know what huge issue he has with Keith Thurman. And ever since Keith Thurman, came back from his injury after the Manny Pacquiao fight, he been calling out Errol Spence. Take the smoke, dog. You know what I'm saying? Now it's starting to look funny on EJ part, trying to stick to his guns on that, I'll never fight Keith Thurman. Now people are starting to question, can you beat Keith Thurman? Is it something that Keith Thurman presents that will cause you too much difficulty so you don't want to fight him? I'm not saying that, but people starting to say that now. What's the problem? You know what I'm saying? That's the best fight for both of y'all, not just you. And I got Errol Spence probably stopping Keith Thurman to the body. But I still want to see it because I don't know what happens until we see the fight. Anyway, y'all make sure y'all smash my like button. I already know some of y'all crying in here. I'm an Errol Spence fan. I just keep it a buck. Make sure you smash my like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already subbed. And y'all already know how I do. Tego talking that boxing again. And I'm gone.
Bye-bye. I know the haters can't stand it. I ain't got a blemish on my Jolly Rancher can. Ride on.